What we're trying to do is reduce government. We have too many people.
The word tariff is my favorite word in the dictionary.
He's elected to get him the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
The golden age of America has only just begun.
President Trump is the nation's commander-in-chief, and this week he will not let you forget it, whether it's his supporters coming to Washington for the Army's 250th birthday, and by the way, Trump's 79th birthday, or Trump's deployment of the National Guard and Marines in Los Angeles against the wishes of California's governor. Welcome to Sidebar from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey, and I'm here today with Rhonda Colvin and James Hohmann. Political video journalist Anna Liss-Roy will join us shortly to talk about the preparations for Trump's big military parade. And it sort of is his parade, even though it's really for the Army's birthday. But let's start with the protests happening in Los Angeles and what's expected in other parts of the country this weekend and the increasingly militarized response. And James, let's just recap sort of how this started in LA and what people were rising up against, what they were upset was happening.
ICE had been focused on sort of trying to get violent criminals, and there's been a lot of pressure for them to increase their numbers of deportations. And so they've started casting a much wider net, and they went to a Home Depot on Friday, for example, and other areas where there are undocumented immigrants who are gathered in large numbers. And that led to some confrontations and escalation. Things were sort of getting under control. There were some awful attacks where people were throwing rocks at ICE police cars, but then on Saturday, Donald Trump ordered the National Guard to deploy, going around the governor who didn't want it, and that led to more protests, more escalation. Now they're talking about a multi-month deployment of Marines beyond the National Guard, and it's become this kind of political fight, court fight, even as the protests themselves in Los Angeles seem to be somewhat petering out.
Yeah, I remember Stephen Miller was really upset that the numbers of arrests weren't higher, and he was saying like go to the places where migrants are, and that's exactly what ICE has done. But there's so many layers of this. And what does Trump want us to focus on? Like, what does he want us to look at and focus on in this moment, Rhonda?
Well, I think the visuals. And we do know from recent polling that the president has seen an uptick in his numbers when it comes to how he is treating his immigration policies. So I think, number one, Trump is always aware of the optics. So having cameras there to show this and saying in the Oval Office that these are insurrectionists and we had to send the troops there to protect LA. This is all sort of in his playbook to get eyes on a problem he says is happening. However, that is obviously counter, as James said, to what Governor Newsom and Karen Bass, the LA mayor, say is happening. And also Angelinos who are like, wait, this is only happening in like a few blocks, really. The rest of Los Angeles seems to be going about their business. But I think Trump really wants to show the optics, maybe let this be a test case. I've heard that as well, that this could be something he uses to apply to other cities and states.
Why is that word insurrectionist so important?
Well, there's something called the Insurrection Act, and it is thought that Trump may want to use that in order to have a legal argument to send troops into American cities. So if you remember some of his early comments after the National Guard was deployed last weekend, he did say these are insurrectionists. There is thought that he's trying to lay some groundwork so when there are legal challenges, which there are, like as we speak, later today, Governor Newsom has asked a judge to block the National Guard from operating there. We'll see what happens with that. But this is setting up a legal fight.
Trump sees this as a do-over of 2020. In Trump's view, he was not aggressive enough when there was protesting that became rioting after the murder of George Floyd. And he really wanted to send in the troops in D.C. when
Can I just pause you there, though? Because, yes, there was certainly rioting. But like the protests happening in D.C., where he did, have this confrontation in Lafayette Square and stuff, that was not like rioting. Those were protests.
Well, I think in Minneapolis, it took like 4 days for the National Guard to go in. There was widespread looting. Stuff was set on fire. And I think Trump thinks he looked weak. And he is determined he felt like he was stopped by Mark Esper, who was the Secretary of Defense at the time, and I think has surrounded himself in the second term with people who are going to be a lot more pliable and will say, yes, sir, we're going to send the troops in. And I think he sees this as a chance to look strong, but also to create this impression that we talked about so often on this show of action, that he's doing something, and that he likes the impression of briskly using his executive power.
Yeah, I immediately thought of the Mark Esper situation, who was, the former Secretary of Defense. And I actually looked up a quote that he said about how much he disagreed with Trump asking Esper, along with General Mark Milley, to send troops in to quell the protests here and everywhere. And it is Esper says Trump felt that the U.S. looked weak. Everyone was paying attention around the globe when it came to the George Floyd protests. And there was a quote that Esper said about a meeting with Trump at that time. He said, "We reached that point in the conversation where Trump looked frankly at Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley and said, 'Can you just shoot them? Just shoot them in the legs or something.'" Esper was so bothered by that. And he actually said he stayed in the administration because he felt like that was a turning point, that Trump might become dangerous. But in the end, Trump did fire him in November of 2020. But it shows you that the situation you're seeing in LA right now is it's not out of thin air, really, when you look at how Trump has viewed using military force on civilians.
So Democrats say Trump is intentionally provoking protests, right? And Governor Newsom in California has said the National Guard will rile people up, like they'll become a target. And he has said that the police have been protecting the National Guard, in fact. So what is the Democratic argument here, James? And also, what visuals do they want people to see in this moment?
Democratic leaders are privately frustrated because they do feel like the images of people waving Mexican flags and standing on top of burning Waymos are incredibly unhelpful for them. They would much rather have the visuals be of families getting separated, or migrants, getting rounded up in ICE raids. They think that that's a lot more sympathetic for their cause. On the other hand, Democrats have been reluctant to be seen as being overly critical of the protests. It's obviously there's a line between protests and riots, big line, but I think that there has been you saw like John Fetterman go out there very forcefully and say this is terrible, this needs to stop, and then you saw criticism from a lot of Democratic rank and file, and I think Gavin Newsom sees this as a way to improve his standing for the 2028 Democratic primary. This certainly is helping him with that base. But
he's also trying to take like a law and order stance.
Yeah, and Karen Bass has actually been like, the violence is unacceptable, stop the violence.
And one of Newsom's arguments is like, I actually use National Guard troops on the border in California to protect the border, to help fight wildfires, to do all these things. And you are pulling resources from the border. You're pulling safety resources in order to do this. So he's not like, and he's condemning like people who are committing violence and rioting. So is he managing to walk this line here? To be the opposition to Trump?
I think it's a hard line to walk. We'll see. I think that you just have to be careful if you're a Democrat not to be seen as being on the side of the rioters,
which is what he's trying to do.
Which is what
he's trying to walk. Yeah, Newsom's trying to walk this line of like, I'm against these raids. I support law and order, and also like get your National Guard troops out of my backyard. Okay, so there was this hearing today on Capitol Hill, Rhonda, with governors.
Sure it's
still, yeah, right, totally. With governors who are having to defend their stance on like sanctuary cities and stuff like that. It's bringing in some of these liberal governor faces that we may be seeing vie for president at some point. Tell us about what was going on.
So it's Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, also Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, also, the former VP pick on the Democratic ticket.
A lot of attention got paid to what happened in Minneapolis, of course. He's talked a lot about that.
And then J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, governor of Illinois.
I think that's the one I'm thinking of as being like the potential.
Right. Yeah. The latter two are the ones that may be considering higher office.
They all want it.
Right. They all do.
We're all considering higher office, Rhonda.
But the sanctuary governor's hearing, as the House Oversight Committee has titled it, actually
calling it that.
Yes,
it
follows another one that happened earlier this year with mayors who were also from Democrat cities. A lot of it's been political theater. I think that was expected. You have a lot of Republicans yelling at the governors and not giving them a chance to answer and saying that you are allowing crime to come into your communities because you're not working with federal law enforcement or ICE when it comes to deportation. A lot of theater there. But the Democrats, probably because of the timing of this, given that it's the week of what's going on in LA, you're seeing a lot of Democratic lawmakers say, this is a split screen where we are bringing in governors who are now having to protect their states from the federal government wanting to come in and send troops. So there has been a little bit of an opportunity for Democrats in this hearing to sort of bring people's attention to what's going on in LA. But again, it's been a lot of theater, a lot of, pointed questions by Republicans to these governors.
James, when people think about LA riots, it really brings up a visceral memory of what happened in the 90s with Rodney King, when there were really struggles all over the city. But as Rhonda pointed out, this is in a much more isolated, contained part of LA. But it does, those words, LA riots, have this real resonance in the American consciousness. It's really kind of probably no accident that this is also started in LA.
Yeah, and it's America's second biggest city. I think that it is a reflection of the age of social media, where you can have a relatively small. The images are bad. Waymo's a bunch of cars on fire. Again, people waving the foreign flags. But even if it's isolated, all of a sudden it gets amplified, and that's what
do y'all remember on Inauguration Day in 2017, Trump's first term, there was a car set on fire. It happened to be right in front of the Washington Post building, and there were like a gazillion photographers and people like circling the car to get the image. And if you saw that image later, you'd think that all of Washington was on fire, and like one block to the north, people were like, sipping their lattes and walking their dogs and going to the office. And it just is like those pictures, speak 1,000 words. And that's why I think both sides of this fight are trying to figure out how they get the images in front of American people that will speak to them, right? That will either tug at their heartstrings or make them angry or have some kind of emotional reaction. Where does this go from here? We're going to be watching protests this weekend. We're going to talk about the Army Parade in a few minutes, but there are going to be demonstrations across the country in cities and in even small communities with this No Kings effort, Rhonda. What are you watching this weekend in the protest front?
Well, one thing to have the LA situation happen with the military parade, which, as you said, we'll talk about a little later, it does seem as if a lot of American cities are on edge right now. I think there are several protests and reasons to protest going on all over the place. And there were multiple cities yesterday that also had protests that were aligned with what's going on in LA. So you have the No Kings counter programming that's happening against the backdrop of the Trump parade or the Army birthday parade. Yes.
Right?
And that's happening in, I believe they had 1,500 cities right now. One of the biggest ones will be in Philadelphia, and that is to show the organizers who are with Indivisible, a progressive group. They want to show that there's a lot of unrest in the rest of the United States, not just in DC, and that they are against having such a parade that is a somewhat birthday party and military parade.
Yeah, and so Trump's view is that a show of force could deter people from coming out. He's saying, that we're going to crack down forcefully. And of course, the risk is that it ends up putting fuel on the fire and that it ends up leading to incidents elsewhere. And so Trump's out there threatening to send the military into other cities if there are riots, and we'll see if it comes to that. But it does seem like Trump's itching for a fight. And, in these crowds, you can have thousands of people, some of whom have come out because they're angry about the military being deployed. And all it takes is a few anarchists who are not there to support the cause, but are happy to kind of instigate stuff. And then that gives Trump the pretext to crack down. And so, which is what some of those people want. Mm-hmm. So it's a combustible situation then, especially when you have people with guns, there could be an accidental discharge and things can escalate and get out of hand. There's a long, unpleasant history in the United States of when you use the military and go into places. You think about like Kent State with the National Guard during the Vietnam era, or the Ludlow massacre in Colorado during the 1920s when they were putting down a strike and they ended up killing a bunch of women and children who were related to miners who weren't working. And so there's reason to be nervous about where this goes, especially if this is a multi-month commitment, and especially if Trump is sort of chomping at the bit to send people into other cities.
Well, we'll talk more about the military presence that will be here in D.C. this weekend for this celebratory event, the Army's birthday. Stay with us. This is Sidebar from the Washington Post. This is Sidebar from the Washington Post. You can watch with us on YouTube. Just look for the Washington Post, or of course, find us on your favorite podcast app. Welcome to our colleague Anna Liss-Roy, political reporter. You can follow her videos on TikTok and Instagram. Just look for Anna Liss-Roy, all one word. Thank you, Anna, for joining us. Anna's going to be part of our team covering the Army parade, the birthday party this weekend, and she went down to the National Mall yesterday to check out the route. More on that in a moment. But let's just take a step back first. Why are we doing this? I mean, this 250th anniversary has been a long time coming. We've known there would be some pomp and circumstance in D.C. But James, what was the original notion of this, and how has it dramatically increased?
This is another one of those contrasts between Trump 1.0 and 2.0. He went to Paris for the Bastille Day parade with President Emmanuel Macron and loved it. And it's kind of the big parade. And so he decided he wanted one for himself. And in the first term, he had a lot of pushback from the military. He had a lot of pushback from DC local leaders who said, this is going to rip up the streets. It's going to be really expensive. It's a bad look. It's not really, America's known for the power of our example, not the example of our power. And he kind of backed off under all that pressure. And this time he'll be damned if he doesn't get his big, beautiful parade, as he might call it.
But my understanding is the permits were already in process and everything before Trump even came into office. So there was going to be some recognition and honor at this moment.
Right. It is the anniversary or birthday of the U.S. Army. So they had plans already to do something to mark that event. That was already in the works. Also, the Secretary of the Army has said this is somewhat of a recruiting event where it will show, the power of the American military. You'll be able to see people dressed in, the periods of time that the military has been in service of the country. So it was really sort of a patriotic move by the U.S. Army. They already had their paperwork in. They were doing this. But of course, it is Trump's 79th birthday on the same day, also Flag Day. So I believe there was an effort by Trump and his team to, join in on this.
Anna, you went down to check out the preparations for this. We're just a couple of days away. What's the security footprint like? What are they setting up?
Yeah, so I biked down there from the office yesterday, and you can tell that something is happening before you're even there because of how bad the traffic is.
They're closing so many streets.
Oh, absolutely. And so I biked what I could, doing a couple laps up and down the street. The parade will start right by the Lincoln Memorial at 23rd Street Northwest and Constitution. And just looking up Constitution, you can see already the bike gates they have set up, which turns into fencing as you get closer to the White House. Along the National Mall there, that is where people will be standing and watching. It is standing room only, so be prepared. And then as you get closer to the White House, there's lots of construction happening. There is a large stage there. That is where the post-parade concert will happen. And then across the street from there is where the press area I could see was being set up. So lots of construction happening. And that section in front of the White House actually is already closed to cars, to your point about street closures, which will be a theme because some roads in the area will be closed for 4 days. And then on Saturday during the parade, so from 6 to 9:30, flights out of Reagan National Airport will actually be paused. Obviously, security day of, there will be thousands of law enforcement. If you are attending, there are designated security checkpoints, restrictions, of course, on what you can bring in and out. I mean, they're preparing for potentially hundreds of thousands of people. So we'll see how many come, but security will be tight.
The forecast isn't great for the weather. It seems like it might rain on Trump's parade.
It might rain on Trump's parade.
It's literally. Were you able to see where President Trump will be through all this?
Not really. I mean, there's a lot of construction happening around the ellipse near the stage, which is where he'll be watching on risers, some kind of situation, reviewing it. But yeah, I mean, he will be there watching. Also, he's supposed to, at some point in the day, enlist and re-enlist 250 soldiers and civilians. And at some point, maybe weather allowing, the Golden Knights, a group of parachuters will drop in and are supposed to present him with the American flag. So beyond that, we'll see how much he participates. But obviously, this is something he's wanted for a long time.
Yeah, and part of this is like the viewing experience, right? Being able to watch your troops, show up in front of you and show up before you as the commander in chief. Did you see any of the military vehicles? I mean, we're seeing a lot of footage on social media and elsewhere, these videos of like tanks and troops just kind of like assembling on the outskirts of the city, getting ready for this.
Totally. I've been seeing videos all week, people getting stuck in traffic because of tanks and combat vehicles coming in on the backs of trucks and coming in on trains. It's surreal, and we are not used to this, right? And so it speaks to how striking of a visual it will be on Saturday to see them all processing down Constitution Avenue before the President of the United States.
James, what are you watching for this weekend? I mean, this is so much pomp and circumstance. And just to take a mini step back, it's like a whole day of activities and then the parade, as you said, at night, Anna.
I think that one of the storylines of this week is Trump politicizing the military. And I think that there is a risk if he makes remarks and if he really turns this into a Trump parade instead of an Army parade. Obviously, everyone wants to celebrate the 250th birthday of the Army. But this is coming against the context of, as part of the Army's birthday, Trump went to Fort Bragg in North Carolina on Tuesday afternoon, and it was like a political rally. They screened the soldiers who were in attendance, but Trump got the crowd booing Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom, the media, Joe Biden, and it was as if it was a normal Trump rally, even though these are men in uniform. Obviously, he's deploying the Marines in a very unusual way, going over the objection of the governor. One of the other big things he did this week was rename a bunch of military bases so that they now, again, have the names that they share with the Confederate generals that had been changed before, which in Trump's first term he had actually supported. And so there's a bunch of different things that are happening that are, I think, can be viewed together as politicizing the military.
Rhonda, what's the congressional reaction to this?
Seems like Congress wants to keep some distance from this parade. They, of course, are working on the big, beautiful bill and trying to bring that to fruition by July 4th. They're recessed that week. But in terms of what Republicans have been saying, a lot of them are not going. They're saying they're just going to go back to their district. I think one of the things that I have heard is there is some minor concern about the price tag for this event. It is going to cost, the estimate is $25 million to $45 million. Roger Wicker, who is the Republican senator who chairs the Senate Armed Services Committee, he said last week in a hearing that he would have probably advised against doing this when he learned about the price tag. Rand Paul has been a little bit more vocal about his opposition to it.
Can we listen to some of what the senator said? Yeah, let's roll the tape of Senator Rand Paul.
I've never been a big fan of two-stepping soldiers and big tanks and missiles rolling down the street. So if you ask me, I wouldn't have done it. I'm not sure what the actual expense of it is. But I'm not really, we were always different than, the images you saw of the Soviet Union and North Korea. We were proud not to be that. And I'm not proposing that that's the image that people want to project, but I'm worried about the image, that it isn't necessarily the best image to show.
Some hallway tape of Senator Rand Paul, Rhonda.
Yeah, and in terms of who will be going to this, when we were talking about lawmakers, it does appear that more House members are going to attend. Folks like Byron Donalds, Elise Stefanik, people who are definitely a part of sort of the MAGA world, and it probably will help boost their brand to attend something like this. But you are seeing senators especially distance themselves from it because of that price tag. And I actually had some numbers that when James was talking about the split screen of this happening against LA, it is, as I said, between $25 and $45 million that this may cost. But the Post has also estimated that it could be about $134 million in order for the National Guard to stay in LA. So this is a lot of money being spent, of course, for different things, but a lot of the military's budget is centered into this week. And a lot of people are concerned about it.
Soldiers are going to be sleeping in federal office buildings. I mean, this is going to be sort of the downtown will really have like a very different feel. It already does this weekend. Anna, it was hot yesterday when you typical DC, the humidity starting. How much like rehydrating did you have to do after your bike ride? Because we're going to have a lot of reporters out this weekend all day.
Yeah, this is a PSA to anyone who is going to be there, whether you're covering it or planning to attend. Bring a water bottle or a Gatorade that is this big. I don't know if that's allowed, but we need to figure it out because, yeah, I went straight to Wawa and literally chugged the largest Gatorade I've ever encountered. So, yeah, my gear bag is going to be very chaotic between preparing for the heat and the rain.
I think Anna should get like a Camelback, that like
one of those beer helmets.
That'll take
me out sooner.
No, you're right. A Camelback is much more appropriate.
Rhonda, what are you going to be watching this weekend in this split screen moment?
One of the things I really am curious about is the attendance. We know the president loves the big crowds. And specifically, his base, they are expected to be most of that audience. I looked up some polling right now. It says that 60% of all U.S. adults think that there's too much money being spent on this parade. But when you look at party line, only 35% of Republicans feel too much is being spent. So it almost seems like this will be Donald Trump's crowd. However, I do wonder if that crowd will come out for something like this. It seems like they're oftentimes energized when they feel embattled. But if this is a more a celebratory situation where, they feel good about where the country is going, will they turn out? Do they feel the need to come out in the rain, in the heat, with all of the security? Because it is intense. It's more intense now than I think we've seen from inaugurations, any other special security events. I mean, if you are living in DC right now, it is very hard to get around starting tonight through Monday. So are people going to want to travel to that? So I'm really looking at the crowd size and who is in that crowd.
And how politically loaded does it feel? Like if you're someone who just really wants to see the military flyovers, or you want to show your little kids tanks and things like that, are you coming out for this, or are you only coming out if you are a Trump supporter? How partisan does it feel, basically?
And how many protests are there going to be too? Trump says if there's protests, we're going to come down on them hard. Then the next day, the White House is saying, of course, the president is fine with peaceful protests, which was a little ambiguous from his initial statement. And so it wouldn't take that many people to create some sort of scene that might play into Trump's hands. The visuals are going to, crowd size obviously matters a great deal, but the U.S. has the most powerful military in the history of the world. And the visuals will be compelling. And I think that sometimes things can get lost in the politics, but you end up having this sort of swell of civic pride. But if it becomes the Trump show, then I think Trump is so polarizing that you might not get that.
And if you have American citizens worried that Trump's going to send the military into Philly if people protest peacefully, it's like, that's different. Is this the American military to be used on adversaries outside the country, or is this an American military that could even be used on its own citizens?
And the split screen too will be if it's raining in DC and people are afraid to come because of the hassle with getting in, and then you have this massive protest in Philadelphia as part of this No Kings rally where it's sort of this anti-Trump protest. That could end up cutting against Trump as well.
That's true. And I will also mention that the No Kings protests, they are choosing not to come to DC so that they can, show that people are upset in other parts of the country. But there are very near to DC in Bethesda and also in the suburbs in Northern Virginia, they will have No Kings rallies as well. So there is a potential for groups to clash because they are near each other. I mean, it's just so much going on. So,
but there is distance though between those places you're talking about and the city, although people will be coming in and out as they can get in and out. So we'll be watching it all. We'll be covering it all. Thanks so much, Anna and James and Rhonda. I'm Libby Casey. We'll be really watching this story unfold throughout the weekend at the Washington Post. Find us in your social media feeds. Go to WashingtonPost.com. We'll have wall-to-wall coverage of all of it around the country. So tune in, and we will see you next week on Sidebar.